All right. Oh, I see. Great. All right. I think we're ready to start. Ooh. Now we're ready to start. All right. Well, hello, everyone in person and on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Amanda Kahn, and on behalf of the Invertebrate Ecology Lab, I'm very excited to introduce today's seminar speaker, Dr. Cherisse Du Preeze. Dr. Du Preeze got her PhD at the University of Victoria under the supervision of Professors Verena Tunnicliffe and Kim Juniper. Then she went on to complete a postdoctoral positions at Pennsylvania State University and had an NSERC visiting fellowship at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans before moving on there to where she is now the head of the Deep Sea Ecology Program at DFO. And so in addition to that, she's an adjunct professor at the University of Victoria and co-founder of the Northeast Pacific Deep Sea Exploration Project. I didn't think of how to pronounce that. NEPDEP, Neep Deep. So she is primarily working on deep sea marine protected areas in Canada's Pacific Ocean. She specializes in deep sea exploration, focusing on the identification, characterization, and mapping of ecologically important animals living on the seafloor. She is a champion of conservation for the deep sea, science outreach and communication, and the co-creation of science with Indigenous people. So with that, very excited to welcome you today and to hand it over as Dr. Du Preeze gives her talk, Bringing the Deep Sea Home. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction. I feel like feel like you have it covered, and I could just take questions now. No, okay. Let me share a screen here. A moment. Let me just stop there and try again. Make sure I got audio. Yeah, I got audio. Okay. Well, you guys have all disappeared, but I'm going to assume that you're out there in the internet world and that you can hear me. And if the IT people stop hearing me or stop seeing my screen, please turn on your audio and let me know. Okay, and with that, let's get going. So I gave this title, Bringing the Deep Sea Home. I thought it was inspired, and then I went back and forth and thought maybe it's a little bit silly, but I think I've landed on maybe it's inspired. And I like it because I think that all the science that me and my group do try bring the deep sea home. We try bridge the gap between people in the deep sea. We try and make the science really personal, and we really try to show how everything we do in the deep sea is really important. Although Amanda gave me a great introduction, I thought I would start off by just saying a little bit about me. So this is me in a nutshell. One, I think I'm funny, so I can't hear you guys laughing, but I trust that you are. And two, the ocean is really my happy place. So even when I'm not working, you can usually find me in the ocean or riding above it or on a boat. So I'm really one of those scientists that believe in all of this, and I really do want to do good by the ocean. Like most scientists, I wear a lot of hats. Amanda's already told you about some of them. I like to think that just first and foremost, I'm a deep sea explorer and a marine biologist. In addition to wearing a lot of hats, I also like to collect a lot of acronyms. So I'm going to tell you about some of the other hats I wear. So I work for DFO. I'm the head of the Deep Sea Ecology Program. I wanted to mention too that I'm a member of the Diversity Inclusion Action Team. While I advocate for diversity inclusion all over, how it affects me is I'm severely dyslexic, and I wanted to include that in case the spelling in my slides bugs anyone. And you could be like, yes, Cherisse self-identified as a terrible speller. I am an adjunct at UVic. I'm an active member of DOSI because that just makes good sense. The Deep Sea Ocean Stewardship Initiative is full of great like-minded people, and I love working with them. And maybe the next acronym will make more sense of that. I'm also part of the Canadian delegation to the International Seabed Authority. So that's the authority that regulates mining in the deep sea, which makes being part of DOSI a really good pairing. And then, yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about NEEP Deep, the Northeast Pacific Deep Sea Exploration Project. And Amanda, I decided that it's NEEP Deep instead of NEPDEP, and I liked it because it sounded like a robot, like a little sub was saying it, even though I know that's not how it's spelled, but I figured since I made it up, I get to decide how it's pronounced. Okay, I also wanted to throw out there that I'm a fangirl of the Moss Landing Institute and MBARI, because back in 2019, that's actually, I don't know if you can see my cursor, that's me with much longer hair in the front row, very excited about I think it was an imaging workshop. And I did notice there are still some faces that were around then that are around now. And I've got to point my cursor over here. I believe that's Brian giving a great grin. Yeah, so pretty cool to be giving this talk here. And yeah, what can I say? Fangirl, so I wish I was there in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you now. Okay, so let's dive into my science. For Fisheries and Oceans Canada, my science really is all about the CBD, the Ocean Decade, Sustainable Development. So of the 10 challenges under the Ocean Decade, there's really 3 that I focus on: protection and restoration of ecosystems and biodiversity, and then also skills, knowledge, and technology for all, and then of course, changing humanity's relationship with the ocean. And so this is all getting to, or at least for Canada, this is all getting to our target of protecting 30% of our ocean by 2030. I also throw in that we are deeply committed to the International Decade for Indigenous Language and also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so my job largely uses the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, EBSA criteria. Wow, this is a lot of acronyms. I'm really sorry. The Ecological and Biological Significant Marine Areas assessments to find those special places and special animals in the ocean that require protection. And then my tool that I use is setting up spatial management areas, so marine protected areas. Off our coast where I work in the Pacific, we have 4 deep sea EBSAs that take up most of my time. And if you work in the deep sea, you might be thinking right now, that's a lot for a deep sea ecologist to focus on. And trust me, I know. I'm blessed by how much there is in our oceans, and also it's a curse. But what I thought I would do is walk through this presentation, telling you about these EBSAs, and then trying to really bring examples of that, bringing the deep sea home, sharing it with people, sharing it with the Indigenous people, communicating science in different ways, and really stressing where the importance lies for the general public. This map, let's start on the right side of it. So we have the globe. I've pointed out where most of you are probably down in California, and you can see that I'm up north in Canada, and I work off the Pacific coast, like I mentioned, and I'm going to trust that you could see my pointer when I go over the screen. So I'm going to point to things, but I'll also try to describe them. Oh, I wanted to start by pointing out we have a Davidson seamount too. I think your name came first, but I did think that, wow, we have so many similarities. I think you have all the same EBSAs in your waters. You have a really great seafloor too. I found it really hard to actually make this presentation because there was so much I wanted to share that I thought so many of you would find interesting because our waters are so similar. So yeah, it doesn't just stop with us also having a Davidson seamount. I'll point out that the marine protected areas that I spend most of my time working on is Scone-Kingless-Bowie Marine Protected Area that protects 3 seamounts, and that's with the Haida Nation. Then we have our really large, in the pink here, or maybe brown, Tungwan-Hutchqueca-Sigis MPA, and that has 47 seamounts in it and 31 hydrothermal vents, and that actually wraps around the historic Endeavour MPA, which has 4 hydrothermal vents in it. If that was plenty of EBSAs, there's actually more. We have 15 seamats that aren't protected. And then we have lots of small coastal MPAs for the cold water coral and sponge grounds. And then I'll also just point out, we don't actually have any MPAs for cold seeps yet, but we are working on it. So really, our ocean is chock-a-block full of these MPAs. And I should also point out that other than Scarn Kingless Bowie MPA, we co-manage all of these with the Quatsino, the Pachidat, and the Nuchalnet nations. Okay, so when I get frustrated with how much work there is for me to do, I can always just blame the tectonic activity off our coast. I thought I'd point this out for any geologists who are joining today. So as you might know, we have Explorer Plate, we have Juan de Fuca Plate, we have the Pacific Plate, and all of this is subducting or sliding beside the North America Continental Plate. So I think I'm correct in boasting that we have either the world's smallest tectonic plates in our waters or close to it. And then we also have the fastest strike fault. So all of this jostling and tectonic activity is why we have that really interesting seafloor, all those EBSAs and the large MPAs that I showed you. Okay, so I can't see you. I'm going to hope that you guys don't fall asleep on me here, but I did want to talk some government language to you really quick so that you could see what my day-to-day pay job really is. And I'm going to keep it brief, but stay with me. Okay, so what I'm on the hook to do for the government is to locate these EBSAs and run the assessments. So I write really beautiful 200-page documents that are usually black and white, and they have like a punchline table that looks like this, and it synthesizes all this information into saying, yeah, seamounts are highly likely to be EBSAs. Cold seeps are highly likely, hydrothermal vents. So that's my 9 to 5. In addition to that, I also write monitoring frameworks and management frameworks for these marine protected areas. So now we're getting a little bit of color. This is the most recent document that I wrote up. It's a whopping 170-page document about how you could go about monitoring one of these marine protected areas. And I make complex spaghetti graphs like this so that nobody thinks that it's actually an easy task. Okay. I wanted to point out that I have a chip on my shoulder about these documents. I'm being completely transparent here. These documents are technically said or thought of as gray literature. And because you are our neighbors to the south, and because so many of you might study these, I'm going to implore you to look through the DFO, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, science advisory reports, our tech reports, because it's not your average gray literature. Okay, hear me out, don't fall asleep yet. But to get one of these documents passed through and to have Canada's stamp of approval on it, you have to write up the document, you send it to 2 external reviewers, you send it then to about 50 other reviewers, you hold a 3-day meeting, all of those reviewers show up, and for 3 days, they just fire at your document and you have to defend it or change it. And whatever you're left with at the end is what goes into this report. And it's not just internal DFO scientists that are showing up to these meetings. We have academics from Canada, from around the world. We have stakeholders. So they're really, they're meaty and there's a lot in them, and I've disclosed the chip on my shoulder about it. So if you are interested in any of the work that I show you today and you're like, why can't I find it when I go to Google Scholar, check our DFO library online and you'd be able to find the information there. Okay, so if you fell asleep, wake up, because I'm going to go back to our more exciting stuff that we do. And I thought I'd start by showing you our team. At least this is the team on my last expedition, which was a once-in-a-lifetime expedition, and it's the one that I'm going to draw most of the research from today. But we have a lot of fun when we go out to sea, and it's a shame that it's distilled into black and white documents, but we make sure it gets to other places too, don't worry. So I mentioned Knee Deep. it's this initiative that we started very recently, just this summer. And just today, I submitted for United Nations Ocean Decade endorsement, and we've got Challenger 150 endorsement. So it's got legs, and we're trying to move it along. But what it was is we wanted a place to all be able to do science together. And when I say we, I mean for the government to step up, for us to be able to enter into the arena with the Indigenous people on an even playing field, to have folks like Ocean Networks Canada and universities join. And instead of it being, DFO leads this expedition or DFO is doing this, that we all just do it under this umbrella organization. And so that's Knee Deep. It's just grassroots, and it's all of us coming together. Oh, I should just warn that I'm going to show you a couple of videos in this presentation, and I'm going to trust that you can hear it. And so this video shows you the expedition that we just had, because I thought better for it to show you what we do than for me to explain it.
The 2023 Northeast Pacific Deep Sea Expedition has come to a close after 2 weeks working in and around the proposed Tungwan-Hutch-Quikuk Sea Geese Marine Protected Area. Our expedition was unprecedented. The discoveries we made and our personal encounters with deep sea animals have left us speechless. In collaboration with multiple nations and other scientists, we checked off a long list of objectives and collected data that will be used to inform research and marine conservation planning. With the help of ROPOS, a state-of-the-art remotely operated vehicle, we visited an array of amazing deep-sea ecosystems. The imagery we obtained with the help of ROPOS is immaculate and allowed us to capture behaviors and ecosystems that have never been seen before. We returned to Explorer Seamount to survey long-term monitoring sites. We took ROPOS on a circumnavigation of the peak to answer questions about the distribution of corals and sponges and how they may be influenced by current flow. 21 years after they were last explored, we investigated the hydrothermal vents at Explorer Ridge. ROPOS captured images of shimmering water and black smoking chimneys covered in tuberums and bacterial mats. We gathered important data to support ongoing research, providing evidence of a dynamic system with new areas of active venting, inactive vent sites, and newly classified extinct chimneys. We returned to NEPDEP 58 in the Tuzo-Wilson Seamount chain to gather more imagery at the skate nursery that we discovered in 2019. We obtained the first ever live footage of a Pacific white skate in the midst of laying an egg, and we now have evidence that more than one species of skate utilized this nursery ground. We were stunned to also discover the evidence of hydrothermal venting on the seamount, providing warmer water to the depths, likely aiding in the successful gestation of the skate eggs. Guided by collaborators on land, we ventured to the Winona Basin cold seeps. The ship's echo sounder displayed a plume of bubbles rising 1 kilometer from the seafloor, and gases could be smelled from the deck. On bottom, bubbling gases escaped from the seafloor and large slabs of icy methane hydrates emerged from the sediment. We contributed to ongoing research of cold vent ecosystems by documenting the characteristics of the bubbles and measuring the volume of gas seeping from the seafloor. The amazing capabilities of ROPOS allowed us to complete our deepest dive to date, taking us to an astonishing 3,200 meters. Our taxonomists were ecstatic as we encountered and collected rare and potentially undescribed species. We ended our journey at the Heshkwit Slope Cold Seep Field, where we stumbled upon a garden of female octopuses sitting on their eggs. At each site, oceanographic sampling complemented the bottom-focused work of our expedition. Biological and chemical oceanographic properties of the entire water column were measured to complete the story of the deep sea ecosystems and the body of water that surrounds them. Our research was broadcast to a global audience as we hosted live outreach events from the ship and live streamed all of our dives around the world. Outreach events were hosted cooperatively by our partner nations, collaborators, and the at-sea science team. This expedition was a UN Ocean Decade endorsed activity and will contribute to our global understanding of the deep through the Challenger 150 initiative.
So since I'm going to draw a lot of the stories I'm going to share with you from the work that was just recently done, I should disclose that there's a lot more questions that I have than answers right now, and I will probably spend the rest of my career trying to solve some of these mysteries. Okay, so let's jump into the seamounts first. Off our coast, we have 65 seamounts and counting. So in the map here, you can see how they're largely distributed around the southern half of it. And that's why we've created that really large 140,000 square kilometer MPA around them. Now, what's really incredible about this is that just a few years ago, we only knew about 20 of these seamounts. And it might not come as a surprise to you. It's not because they're new, it's because we've done such a poor job of mapping our ocean. In the little pop-up I've showed here on the right, it shows you the lines in this one particular square of the ocean. That's all the bathymetry we have for that area. You can see there's a lot of bumps in between the lines. We're just not detecting things. So the reason is we don't actually have a ship in our fleet that can map offshore. We have one that can map, but it's a small vessel. It has to stay close to the coast. So we have to rely on international ships coming into our waters. That is until last year, when part of our Knee Deep team, Ocean Networks Canada, created this custom built swing for us. It's a swing arm. You can see the multi-beam here in the photo, and you can see all of us looking down from the ship at the pole we've now deployed in the water with super magnets on it to hold the multi-beam in place, all wondering if this is going to work. And it actually did work. So for the first time ever, we're starting to be able to map our ocean, and that's why we're finding all of these features. Now, this is something that I'm very proud of. So I never imagined in my life that I was going to find, sorry, I lost count. I think it's like 40 something mountains. We've given the, so science, us, we've provided all the data to the Canadian Gazetteer, to the international gazetteers, but we're not going to name them. I'm not going to name them as discovering scientists. We've given those rights, rightfully so, to the Indigenous First Nations. So if you go to the data sets now, you'll see that there's just placeholders where it's knee deep and then a number, and all the science information is there. But it's part of working with First Nations we find really successful is to complete the science and then make sure you change the system so that they can contribute on their own time, because capacity isn't the same in all our different governments. And we do find that if we try to stick to our timelines, it excludes a lot of people contributing. And so we have the placeholders, we have these knee deep names in there, and I look forward to continuing to work with the First Nations as they develop the names and we replace these knee deep names. So regardless of them having a name or not, we're really interested in what's on these seamounts. So we've gone to a few of them. We've actually we've used a classification system to try estimate what is on there, what animals, how the communities are diverse. We're finding diversity between the seamounts. We're finding diversity within the seamounts by depth zones. And then even within different depth zones, depending on what side of the seamount you're on, we're finding diversity based on aspect and current. And so with 65 and counting seamounts and trying to wrap our head around how to best manage and monitor them, in one way, it's amazing that we have so much diversity on these seamounts. And in another way, it drives me absolutely bonkers that returning or going to new seamounts, I'm having a really hard time predicting what we're going to see. And it's always something new, which is, like I said, both really cool and really frustrating. So I thought I'd show you a plate of some of the animals that we see on and around the seamounts. And I wish I had time to go into all the little itty bitty spin-off projects that we're doing, but I will just point out that we have a Pycnopodia paper in the works. And that's because we found really healthy populations of Pycnopodias offshore on our seamounts. Some of our seamounts are just 25 meters depth at the, oops, sorry, I think you can see that. That's the CFO computer thing, but I'm going to trust that it's gone now and you can still see my presentation. So we have this spin-off project about seamounts being refugia for critically endangered animals. So Pycnopodia was one of the animals that was almost wiped out by the sea star wasting disease. I think that affected the populations down in California too. It's now red listed, and the distance between the seamounts and our coast, or the difference in temperature, we're not quite sure of the mechanism, but the populations out there are unharmed. And so they represent the genetic diversity of the species, maybe a lot of it of what remains. I know there's refuges and fjords too, but the populations that we're finding on the seamounts are incredible. And we have a time series of before the sea star wasting disease, during it, and after it, and it wasn't affected, which is really great. Unfortunately, though, there are impacts to seamounts that we're seeing. We wrote up a paper in 2020 about how we've lost 15% of the oxygen in the offshore bathing these seamounts. So 15% of all the oxygen starting from the surface going down to 3,000 meters, really intersecting where these seamounts are rising from. And if Fani is watching, she might recognize this kind of tactic that we're taking. So we're establishing long-term monitoring sites at depths of critical interest. So within and on the boundaries of this oxygen minimum zone that is expanding and we see as a threat to the animals that live on the seamounts. And so we are returning to these sites and doing high resolution mosaicing. We actually are finding that within very small timescales, much smaller than we thought, anywhere from a year to 3 years, we're seeing entire colonies of corals changing, dying, their conditions changing. We're seeing an alarming rate of rapid changes. So the idea of seamounts as refuges in one way, yes, and in another way, unfortunately, not, because of climate change. Okay, so here's one of my, we go to lots of seamounts, and I get more questions than I do answers, is all I have to say is, we keep finding whale falls on the summits of seamounts. I don't know if anyone down at Moss Landing who studies seamounts is finding this too, but we're working with marine mammal survey teams that look at live mammals, and we are seeing them cluster around our seamounts, but we see a weird high number of seamounts that have skeleton remains of whales, and only on the summit. So I don't actually have a science analysis for that. I just wanted to point out it's something strange that we see. And then the other thing that we see is a lot of visitors around seamounts, and I'm going to go through this one kind of quick. It's a little story about visitors we see around seamounts. We see a lot of sharks around seamounts, and very recently we documented sharks acting in strange ways, scratching themselves on logs. And while the story is fascinating and it made world news and it was on Discovery Channel, what I really wanted to point out was that because we do everything with the co-managing First Nations, the scientists on board have a diverse set of skills and backgrounds. And so one of the scientists, Joshua Watts, was able to draw up for our science a field note drawing that was in the traditional art of the New Chalmers, and that made it so that our science story could reach far more than just scientists. It went into art galleries, it was posters. And so we did write it up into a science paper, and fantastically, we got the journal cover with Josh's art, and that felt like a really good step in such a right direction for how we're going to do science, by making sure we incorporate all these different ways of knowing. Okay, so I'm aware of time, and so I might start cutting some stories, but I'm going to move on to the second of the EBSs in our waters that I spent a lot of time looking at. This isn't your typical deep sea photo. It's actually part of the Great Bear Rainforest. We have a lot of fjords and waterways that work themselves far up into the mountains of the Great Bear Rainforest. So essentially you have spirit bears and eagles just a few hundred meters away from, 500 meters depth water with corals and sponges. So it's an absolutely beautiful place to work, and it's really fun taking ships into these tight areas. So in this project, we worked with the Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance that makes up a lot of the different nations in these waters. And they've looked over, stewarded this land since time immemorial. And what they were doing was for about a decade before we entered the picture, they were diving in their areas with scuba diving equipment, with little cameras, and they were really interested in finding hotspots of corals, rockfish, and sponges so that they could self-determine where marine protected areas were going to be. And so they did a phenomenal job of looking at the subtidal anywhere from 5 to 200 meters. But there was this gap. Anything below that was just too deep for them. And so this is part of being good partners to other nations, is showing up for their research questions, not just your own. So we went into the fjord system, we took our deep cameras, and we asked, where do you want us to go? And so we filled in that data gap, everything from 200 to 500 meters. The Secura, they led the research paper. They were able to self-identify the hotspots that they want to propose for protection. So that was fantastic. And it's one of these things of to be a good partner, you have to show up for your partners too. And sometimes that means bringing the technology to them and making sure their objectives are taken care of. And so this was so much fun that we started going up there every year. So here's just a silly photo of some of the team working together. And we started co-creating science. We started making sure we were capacity building, bringing students on board the boat. It was really nice being so close to shore because people could come out for day trips. It's starting to communicate science by including everybody in the actual doing of the science. And so I just wanted to point out that one of our findings through having them on board and having the equipment and asking, where do you want to go, was going to an area where they knew there was good fishing. They didn't know why there was good fishing, but they knew there was good fishing. And what we actually discovered together was Canadian Pacific's first ever intact Lophelia coral reef. I'm sure that down in California, you have Lophelia reefs. The amazing thing is in Canada, we didn't have any. We had these sponge reefs, which you could see on the right side of the screen there. But this was the first Lophelia reef ever found. We're writing it up into paper with them now. But that's the great thing about being out on the ships together and having the time to just go where they know there's spiritual, cultural, important places. And you often find that those are the places where there's ecological value too. Okay, so now on to cold seeps, and this brings us back to the major findings from the expedition that I just had in May and in June. So I'm going to tell you about 3 of the largest findings, and hopefully keep tying back to how much we paid attention to making sure that this was landing with communities, with the public, with policymakers, really trying to bring it home. So this first finding about the large sphere of influence for our cold seeps is really a nod to the Lisa Levin's paper of 2016. I should start by saying that we have not had a good history of studying cold seeps in our waters. I did mention we don't have any cold seep MPAs, even though we have identified them as EBSAs. We thought that we knew that there were going to be more, but we had actually only found 250 bubble plumes. So these plumes where methane is seeping out of the seafloor, these areas where chemosynthetic activity might be happening. The ability to map now is really helping us map the full distribution. So now we're at 1,600 flares, hopefully, and counting. So the first thing is there's a lot more cold seeps than we thought. Also, they're a lot bigger than we thought. If there's cold seep people listening, hopefully these numbers will impress you, but we have cold seep bubbles mapped now that are going all the way from the seafloor to the surface of the water. Some are traveling over 1 kilometer. for instance, Warner Basin Twins, the blowout, we could actually smell the cold seeps on the ship. And so that methane that is tucked deep within the earth is getting out there and it's getting to the surface. And I also want to just point out that we actually have some time series now. So we're seeing these large bubble flares continuously going for 9 months. That's not an impressive number, but for 17 years, some of them. And then when we get the in situ observations, we're seeing features that suggest that it's more like on the order of tens of thousands of years. So just cold seeps have so much bigger of a role to play in our deep sea than we knew before. And so this little video shows something that we filmed actually just a couple weeks ago. I flew off the ship with a drone because we were seeing what we thought were large jellyfish coming up from the sea floor, but it actually turns out that in the cold seeps, oil was seeping out, and we had sailed into a sea covered in hydrocarbons. And so this again gets to that what's happening in the deep sea actually is affecting the entire water column. And to connect the dots here, methane is a really important gas when it comes to considerations of climate change. And so not knowing that this volume was coming out of the ocean was a really big knowledge gap that we're now filling. So we'll just point out quick that we did in situ measurements like measuring bubble size and measuring bubble volume coming out of the seeps. So the second finding about cold seeps that I think is particularly speaks to a lot of people is the habitats that were being created. So flares are something you can detect from the ships, but habitats is now you need to start putting remotely operated vehicles in the water and taking a look around and visually seeing things as well as mapping the bathymetry. So what I have on the map here, the white dots, those were the cold seeps that we had visually checked out, confirmed, and knew in about 2018. And the new ones are the black marks. And you can see that we've more than doubled the confirmed seeps that are creating the most incredible, prominent, and diverse habitats. So seeps don't just create one habitat. We're finding that they're creating strings of mud volcanoes. Neat Deep 56, which is a seamount, is actually a seamount made out of mud volcanoes. It's 2.2 kilometers high. It's 60 kilometers rich. This is a really large feature that's being created by these bubbles coming out of the seafloor, dragging up materials, and forming entire mountain ranges. Another example of a prominent feature is a ridge system. We went to the ridge system thinking that we were going to find carbonate rocks, the rocks made from cold seeps. That's the white you could see in the pictures. We thought we were going to find little spires on top of the ridge. It actually turns out the entire ridge, the entire 25-kilometer ridge, is made out of carbonate, and that it's 500 meters high. And I'll speak a little bit more about the mound in a little bit, but I'll just say that there was another 60-meter high, 750-meter diameter mound that we went and checked out too. And it was incredible. So these cold seeps are actually really defining the seafloor off our coast. And I will just say that on the follow-up expedition that I was on just a few weeks ago, we went to areas where we knew it overlapped with fishing. And we also did the important job of documenting what happens when you get to one of these cold seeps and there's been bottom trawling there, there's been long lining, and we found lost gear, and we found absolutely devastated carbonate areas. So probably the finding that brings it home the most for people that really speaks to them is the animals. And for the cold seep people listening, I'm actually not going to talk about the chemosynthetic animals, even though they're great. I'm going to talk about the animals that connect more to people. So the animals that we love or we love to eat. And I'll start with the fishing animals. So on Blowout Ridge, we would find these areas that had lines of bacteria from the bubbles coming up, the chemosynthetic community. We were seeing clams. And in those areas, we were seeing just an explosion, an abundance of commercially valuable fish. So we were seeing Dover soles and we were seeing short spine thorny heads in these areas. And so I'm not sure how great everybody's eyes are, but I don't know if you picked up how many fish were actually in the shot. I counted and I think it's on the order of 45 different fish are in this one shot. And you're going to have to take my word for it that as soon as we leave the area where the bubbling is happening and the chemosynthetic community is, that fish population just drops off immediate, to the point where I will feel silly one day making a graph that proves that this is true. Now on to the mound. Okay, I love this mound that we found, Hesquiet Slope. And I should point out too that we work so closely with Geomar, and this is something that Michael Riddell really helped us find. But I'm going to take you through this mound because it ends with an amazing story. So it's 60 meters high, it's 750 meters in diameter. There's methane hydrate blistering up. That's what's causing the mound. And what we're finding is that there's materials sliding down, rolling down the base and accumulating at the bottom of the mound. And so we saw things like underwater icebergs sliding down the side of this mound. So that's ice made out of pure methane that is literally floating over the mud, but under the water. Then we found carbonate boulders that had rolled down the cliffs too and accumulated, making caves and boulder fields. This created a complexity floor full of crevices and caves, and if you haven't spotted them already, it also made for a wonderful home for deep sea octopus. So we discovered a deep sea octopus nursery for a beautiful pink purple octopus with big shiny black eyes. We were streaming this live around the world and everybody fell in love with this octopus. And I know that I don't have to tell you guys because I know Jim's paper just came out. The world really loves octopuses. So what we found were these octopus were all sitting on eggs. You can see the eggs there in the picture on the right. You can see the eggs have developed octopus in them with little black eyes. We know that actually from studies from across from you guys on Davidson Seamount, that this particular octopus sits on their eggs for at least 4.5 years, protecting them from these any predators around. They don't leave, they don't go to eat, they just sit there, and then like all other octopuses, once they finish their job of protecting their eggs, they'll pass away. And we did also document babies in the area, which is great because the moms were successfully, defending their eggs. Okay, so in light of Jim's new paper, I wanted to point out some differences. So Jim team, I think Amanda was on it too, found thousands of octopuses. We found much fewer and less dense numbers. So we were seeing dozens of octopus, and we estimate it was on the order of hundreds in the entire area. We had no heat source. So the new paper by Jim really focuses and, it's absolutely the case down by Davidson Seamount that heat for the octopus garden there is playing such a vital role. But we checked and we didn't expect cold seeps to be giving any heat, and they weren't. So the octopus aren't here for heat. And the other thing we documented was that they were actively at least attempted to be predated on by these large scarlet king crabs. And so I just thought I'd show you some additional photos. While it was incredibly slow-mo, we documented these octopus using their arms to punch away the king crabs that were coming in. And I had a lot of fun finding papers that spoke about how octopus actually do use their arms to punch. But it was so slow-mo that there's no way that it made a pow noise. You can see the white carbonate rock here quite nicely. So caves, safety number, we're still trying to work out what it is that draws these octopus to this area. But in an area that is otherwise surrounded by muddy abyss, the boulder field caused by the rolling down this mound seems like a perfect place to congregate. And as I mentioned, this story really spoke to people. It really brought the deep sea home. And these are just some of the clippings for articles that we've enjoyed in the last, I think, month. So I'm on to my last ecosystem, and there's only a couple stories that I wanted to share with you here. So let's move on to hydrothermal vents. So whereas cold seeps, no temperature difference, hydrothermal vents are that chemosynthetic activity that is really defined by the superheated water coming out of the seafloor. And so I'm actually going to skip this video, but what the next video showed was, actually, you know what? I'd love a drink of water. It's a short video. I'm going to play it, and I'll let Rain, who was on the expedition with me, explain.
An extraordinary discovery unfolded beneath the surface of the waves. Around 1,800 meters deep in a vent field previously thought to be extinct, we discovered a brand new, powerful series of hydrothermal vents. This area was pulsating with vibrant life. I am honored to announce the vent area name Joaquina, meaning hot rocks in the Haida language. It's a proud moment for Haida Gwaii. We share another deep sea area with a special name to pass on for generations to come.
So I wanted to share that video because, one, it shows you about the important naming work that we're doing. Just to let you know, we discovered another vent field. We call it Ulukluk, and that's for the Nuu-chah-nulth Nation we were with too on that expedition. But the other thing that Rain touched on there was how it was thought to be an extinct area that actually was active. So we were just at Explorer Ridge hydrothermal vent field, and we really have to work through this still. It's work that I'm doing with Moronki, John Jameson, Amanda Bates, but we had this microbial study set up for this PhD student where we're going to go to active, inactive, and extinct vents. And anyone who's into hydrothermal vent work or deep sea mining work might know about John Jameson's paper in 2020 that really try to point out these different definitions. And it's really important for things like deep sea mining, where mining companies might aim for extinct or inactive vents. But what we found was everything that had been documented when Explorer was visited 20 years ago had actually switched. And now sites that were supposed to be permanently extinct were active again, and active was inactive, and it went all around. And it's something that we're still trying to figure out. We have to obviously change the project on the fly, but this has huge implications for any assumption that a vent could ever be permanently extinct when after 20 years we were watching them switch back on. And then the last story that I wanted to share is I guess the only thing better than finding one nursery ground on an expedition is finding two nursery grounds on an expedition. So I'm going to play this video, and I think it's just got text. Okay, so to fill you in or fill in some more science, we were traveling up what we thought was a dormant seamount, NEPDEP 58, and we knew that it had skate eggs on it. We had seen it with a drop camera in 2019. We were specifically coming back to figure out what was going on because we couldn't do much of the survey with just a drop camera. So we had ROPOST, the ROV, where we were going to go figure out what the skate eggs were about that we saw at the top of this volcano. Immediately, when we started to survey up the side, we realized we were seeing discolored rocks. We saw the shimmering water. We grabbed the temperature probe, and we found out that it's actually a volcano that's actively venting warm water. Later, we found out in the geological records that it's the closest to being an active volcano that we have in our waters, so that it has a heat source actually makes sense. Immediately, I realized in making this observation that something like this had been seen by Pelayo and team in the Galapagos once before. So I'm going to reference that paper, but for those of you that know, 150 skate eggs were seen around active vents in the Galapagos. And so we saw the temperature spiking, spiking. It was lukewarm, but it's still warmer than ambient. We got to about 4 degrees. This photo doesn't do a great job of it, but I'm trying to show here that there's skate eggs in every single crevice. I've done some back of the envelope calculations. We probably documented on the order of hundreds of thousands of eggs in the transects we did over the summit to map out the nursery with row posts. I believe an extrapolation will get us to something on the order of 5 million skate eggs on this summit of what looks like an actively venting seamount. The other thing that we did was, for the first time, I believe in science, we documented the Pacific white skate actually laying eggs. And we were able to confirm that multiple species are using this seamount as a nursery ground. We collected some of the eggs. They were really big, anywhere from 1 foot to 1.5 feet. We got samples to do DNA work. We believe that we're seeing the boreal skate and the large white Pacific skate. Deep sea skate, the Pacific, I believe, spends most of its life around 3,000 meters. We think that they're using a cut in the side of the seamount as like a super highway to get up there. And we saw adults just cruising up to the top and then doing that behavior of laying eggs. With that, I abruptly come to an end, and I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this science in our local languages, Hawa, Kleko, Kleko, Merci, and thank you. And I really hope that in telling you about the episodes that I get to work on, I've brought it back to how much we try to bring it back home with the science and with the communication and with the First Nations. Thank you. And man, I hope you guys are still there. I'm going to stop sharing and check. Hey, there you are.
Thank you so much, Cherisse. That was a great presentation. So we'll open up the floor for questions. People online, if you could use the raise hand feature, we'll ask you to unmute, and people in person, just raise your hand and I'll bring this over to you. Okay, I see one from Keenan.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, great talk. I'm so interested in the cold seas. I don't really know much about them, but one thing that kind of struck me as you were talking about them is like that some of them reach the surface. And I was wondering what you think, like what effect that would have, not on the benthic community, but on like the pelagic communities going upwards along the bubbles.
Yeah, that is a great question. And one of the reasons why I partner with so many people. So I'll let you know that we wondered that on the ship too, when we saw how big the streams were. And so we actually did CTD casts and plankton tows through the bubbles so that we could work it up. But in the readings that I've done, the bubbles do everything from like disrupting stratified water and causing mixing to pulling up different animals and disrupting the stratification of animals. We saw an abundance of whales and fish when we would go down through the streams. We actually had a hard time identifying sablefish, which I want to say is shameful for a benthic ecologist to admit, but they were so high up in the water column and they were schooling in such thick groups that it just didn't occur to me that this was a benthic fish that I was seeing. So it's definitely having an effect on the animals, on the marine life. I can't wait to find out what it is. But I will say that I think the thing that triggers people the most is, and I know that some of my colleagues are going to present on this, is the implications for climate change, climate gas modeling, because these are pumping out, and it's a natural level that we didn't know is occurring, or it's an increased level because the shelves are sloughing and now we're getting more seepage. So I look forward to that too, but I don't actually know the answer other than my observations that there was a lot of activity, including whales, and so higher abundance. Great question though.
I'll slide in. Hi, I made it back. Yeah, are there additional questions from anyone in in-person audience or online? Okay, while people are typing, I have a question. I have so many questions, but I think maybe because it was the last one, I remember watching the live streams when you guys were talking about the skate eggs. And so I mean, how abundant are those skates nearby? What's kind of their geographic distribution of the adults, and how important do you think those nurseries are for, like, you know, at what magnitude habitat?
Yeah, so I love the question. We didn't know the skates were in Canada 7 years ago. So people are like, oh, was it not here before? It's like, no, we weren't down there. So they're a skate that spends its life at like 3 kilometers depth. It's everywhere from Australia, you know, Fiji, China, Japan, all the way to Canada. So it's an ocean basin wanderer. The only other nest that's ever been found had, you know, I love saying this because I love being competitive, but it had 150 eggs, and I think we have 5 million. So I want to say that it's like finding out that all the salmon in Canada might be returning to just one river. Like, the implications, and of course I want there to be population genetics that we could draw from, because we have the skate eggs here. You know, can we tell if they're seeding the larger ocean basin? Unfortunately, because we didn't know the skate actually existed until very recent, and fortunately for the skate, nobody fishes a lot. Like, they don't catch it as bycatch because it's so deep usually that there actually isn't a lot of good information about, other than like occurrence. So we know it goes that far, but yeah, it'd be really neat if there was a little bit more representation in the museums or something, so we could do that population study. But I'm actually, sometimes when I get going on this story, I like to, you know, really say seamounts, hydrothermal vents, they're targeted potentially for deep sea mining. I don't think this is a one-off. We wouldn't have known if we didn't go look. Like, where else are these hotspots? And, you know, can we really afford to say any place unless you really go rigorously? This one's just a few kilometers offshore of Haida Gwaii, and no one had any idea that it might have the progeny for the entire population that fills the ocean. So maybe I'll just leave it there and hope that somewhere in there I hit your question.
Definitely. I mean, that's where my mind was going too, is kind of like and I love that, the idea of protecting, not knowing what other hotspots might be out there. So once you find one, I mean, is there going to be a process for protections, or are they naturally protected already? Some of the locations you have, but.
Yeah, so the ones that we found, the octopus nursery and the skate nursery, are not in the MPAs. They were the work that we were doing because Canada's not at its 30% yet. So we go monitor in the MPAs, and then we're still looking for those new EBSAs, which makes it really fun because we get to run around looking for hunches. And and even before we got back to shore, policymakers were saying, let's meet, we got to protect these areas, which speaks to how important it is to bring that message home, stream it live, get the public engaged, because those places aren't protected and they are in the current fishing footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. I see we have a question in the chat, and let's see.
I think it's a compliment.
So that's oh, it's a comment. Oh, that's lovely. And I mean, also, if any of you have questions or comments, you can type them in the chat, and you can also use the raise hand feature to unmute.
Or if you have answers, because I said a lot of things that I don't understand what's happening.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I see Keenan's hand is up. Keenan, is that an additional question? Would you like to unmute and ask another one?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thinking about like the skate egg cases and like the octopus garden from Jim Barry's paper and stuff. I'm sure these are both questions that you are still thinking about and maybe don't have answers for, but I was wondering, like, what are your thoughts on like why, I think you said the skate egg case site was multi-species, but I don't think that the octopus garden was. And then so maybe your thoughts on that, why that would occur, and then also your thoughts on like if the octopuses aren't drawn to the cold seeps for heat, like do you think that maybe they have some sort of behavioral response to like the smell of methane underwater because it's often associated with heat, or I don't know.
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to start with that because I didn't think about that. Yeah, no, I mean, we thought heat. That's when we saw the octopus, and that's why we pulled out the temperature probe. My line of thought has really been around the crevices that those rocks create, and that it's an indirect connection to cold seeps. So cold seeps create the rocks flow down the mound, they create the boulder field. What a wonderful place to hide when there's nothing else but sand around you and mud. Then I've also started to think about, because we saw so many of them punching those crabs, successfully so, by the way. Let me just say, it was very emotional to watch those crabs rip at the mother's arm. And we sat sometimes for hours watching these animals. And we had a lot of people weighing in real time, suddenly needing crabs for different experiments that they were running. And we're like, no, we can't intervene. Stop asking us to pick up the crabs. But they were actively fighting, and we found that a lot of the octopus would sit together, even though there were lots of crevices. So now I've started to say things like, is it better to be in a gang fight with buddies around you than it is to sit by yourself, especially if you're going to sit for 4 years? And I actually have been contacted by the biometric people that study octopus punching behavior. So I'm going to say crevices, caves, and punching crabs together. I don't know. I'm really interested now if they are cueing to the methane and thinking that because it's in them. I will say that our 2 octopus are different species. And so to go to the egg casing, sorry, that I can't remember what that question was, but was it was it why we saw 2 species? Yes. Yeah. Other than this is such an amazing place to lay an egg, that multiple species have figured out, and does that mean that it's like an abnormally great nursery ground, is all we can think of. Skates do travel to shallower depths to lay eggs. This seamap, because of its shape, could be funneling lots of different skates to its summit. We've also considered that they might not even know that there's a hotspot there, or if they do and they're producing successful offspring, how the heck are they finding it again? I don't think I answered your question, other than it must be wonderful, and we don't know. But the adults were there in such fierce numbers, and the other study, they didn't see any of the adults. They saw 1 species of skate. So part of me wants to be like, no, we found the most amazing place in the ocean, you guys. The other part of me is like, no, there has to be an explanation, and there has to be more of these. So yeah, to be determined.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you. Any additional questions from the in-person? Yeah, do you want to come up or just? Okay, we've got one in the audience here. There you go. You can get in front of the camera if you want, or just talk into this.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Hello.
So my question was about the number of whale falls that you guys were finding. I kind of just wanted to ask, I know you said you guys don't know really why that's occurring so much in that area and on the seamounts.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that and see if you had any like hypotheses of like what's happening or the potential like ecological effects of the areas where the whales are landing. Or
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'll start with the ecological effects. Whale falls are fantastic buffets for animals on the seafloor. We know that they support chemosynthetic communities as well as scavengers. So where they land is it works out really well for an amount of time, somewhere between, I think, or I'm not even going to speculate, but it's on the orders of years until it's completely degraded. So why they're there? Yeah, so when I say that we're seeing them often, it's in comparison to what I know from my colleagues. So some of my colleagues that have been doing this for, I won't say they're old, but a few decades, they've seen maybe 1, 2, and the ROV pilots that we work with have seen a little bit more, but we see them on 50% of the expeditions we go out on, which is weird. So 1 out of 2 times we're seeing a whale fall right on the summit of a seamount. I think that's a really strange number, and I have 2 hypotheses. No, let's say 3, because 2 are really morbid. So I'll say there's a happy one. I'll leave it for the last one. No, I'll say it first. One is, I think we actually are seeing way more whales. And so there's just a higher occurrence of whales around seamounts because they cause upwelling. There's more food around them. The whales are there. And so if whales are there, whales are going to pass sometimes, and maybe there's a higher concentration. I have some other ideas that are a little bit more morbid. One of them is that the whales are actually looking for a place to beach or be close to the coast to die. And they move up a seamount that like they would move up a continental slope, except there is no beach because it's a mountain that summits below the sea. So hopefully that comes across as why I think it's so morbid, because I'm like, if your dying wish was to find a beach and all you do is find the top of the seamount, that would be really depressing. My other idea is that even if that happened, by the time the whale sunk, it wouldn't be over a seamount anyway. So I am involved in this oceanographic study where seamounts creating eddies and catching eddies is a phenomenon that we're tracking with Argos floats and drifters. And so what we see is that a seamount will create a swirl of water, or the coast will, and then it'll shoot off and another seamount will kind of catch it, and it'll be around there for like 2 months. And what I was thinking is, if you were a dead whale and you were floating on the top of the ocean and you got entrenched by one of these eddies that just happened to stay for months at a time over seamounts, then maybe your floating body would then be positioned to land on the top of the seamount. So I don't know if that's where your mind was going, but that's where my mind has been going. And I'd love to hear more about it, because right now I just have an occurrence pattern that is really making me wonder what is going on with these whales. Do you have any ideas?
not really. I feel like I don't
Look.
know enough about whales to really say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
That was really
Yeah.
interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think, thank you. I think we should let the formal interview, or the formal seminar kind of end. And if everybody could thank Dr. Du Preeze for a really fascinating talk, we'll wrap up here. So.
Yay.
And
thank you. That was fun.
Oh, that was so fun for us too. So if anybody wants to stick around and chat, then Dr. Du Preeze is available for a little while, and so we can hang out on Zoom. Can we have permission to like unmute or undo cameras and things, and we'll, yeah. But yeah, thank you. The end of the part where you're totally in the hot
The
seat.
end.